Under the silent rain, his empty hands sought to hold on to memories that were fading like footprints in the sand. Death had taken Weena from him, leaving him with only a small child and a broken heart. In his eyes, the reflection of an endless winter. Then at Red Creek Station, an innocent question changed everything. "Can you be my mommy forever?" asked little Junie to a mixed-race stranger, who also knew the bitter taste of abandonment. Sometimes fate weaves stories where pain transforms into hope, where broken hands learn to heal other wounds. If this story has touched your heart, leave. You're like as one who lights a candle in the darkness, a gesture that says, "I have felt this way too." And tell me, how do you think this story of two souls marked by loss will end? Your voice is part of the journey we are traveling together. The fog crept like a wounded animal between the rusted rails of Red Creek. September 1883 dressed Montana with a premature coldness, as if winter wanted to arrive early. Clara May Whitford watched the train's steam receding, taking with it the last opportunity to return to a home that had never really been hers. Her fingers, reddened by the cold, clutched the yellowed envelope containing Harlan Coulter's letters, the man who had promised to wait for her and make her his wife. The platform slowly emptied. Travelers dispersed like leaves blown by the wind, each toward their destination. Everyone except her. Clara remained motionless, as if her worn boots had taken root in the damp wooden platform. Her amber-colored eyes scanned the faces of those who remained, searching for one that would not appear. It was the fourth time it had happened. The fourth time a man had invited her to come, promising marriage, only to disappear upon discovering the truth about her mixed blood. The looks she received were like needles, some of unhealthy curiosity, others of barely disguised contempt. In Red Creek, as in so many other places in the West, a woman alone was cause for suspicion. A woman with Kiowa features was cause for rejection. Clara breathed deeply. The cold air pierced her chest like a knife, but she was accustomed to pain. She had spent 28 years learning to live with it. Her mother, Hannah Whitford, had always told her that her peculiar beauty was a gift from God. But her father, Nikan, had taught her that it was also a burden she would have to learn to carry with dignity. Now on that lonely platform, dignity seemed a luxury she could not afford. The shadows lengthened and the cold intensified, filtering through her threadbare coat. Night would soon fall. She had no money for a room, barely enough to buy a return ticket in 3 days, when the next train would pass through Red Creek. 3 days in a place where every glance made her feel like a mistake of nature. It was then that a small voice broke the silence that enveloped her like a shroud. The question came like a stone thrown into a still pond, creating ripples that altered her universe. Clara looked down and found herself staring into the purest blue eyes she had ever seen, large and questioning, framed by golden curls that escaped from a worn wool cap. "Junie, don't bother the lady," said a deep voice from behind. Clara looked up and saw him, tall with broad shoulders shaped by years of hard work. His face, partially hidden by a brown beard flecked with grey, showed deep lines around eyes that had seen too much. It wasn't a handsome face in the conventional sense, but one carved by wind, sun, and pain. The man observed the solitary suitcase beside Clara, the crumpled paper in her hand, the despair in her posture. He didn't ask indiscreet questions. Instead, he removed his worn hat in a gesture that spoke of an upbringing that circumstances had not managed to erode. "Luke Harrison, ma'am, seems like someone has let you down." It wasn't a question, but a statement devoid of pity, and for that very reason Clara felt grateful. Luke Harrison's cabin stood solitary in a clearing surrounded by pines, half an hour from Red Creek. Clara observed the landscape from the fogged window, while Junie slept, curled up by the fire. Night had fallen completely, and with it came a silence interrupted only by the crackling of firewood and the occasional distant howl of a wolf. It had not been her intention to accept Luke's offer. "A place to spend the night until you decide what to do," he had said, with a simplicity that disarmed any suspicion. Under other circumstances, Clara would have rejected such a proposition. A woman alone did not accept hospitality from a stranger. Not in the West, where reputations were destroyed with a whisper, but something in Luke Harrison's eyes had spoken of honor. Something in the way he treated his little daughter had assured her that he was a man she could trust, and above all, she had no other option. "The soup is ready," announced Luke, placing a steaming bowl on the wooden table. "It's not much, but it will warm your body." Clara approached, grateful. The aroma of vegetables and rabbit filled the room. She took the spoon and tasted the broth, surprised by its flavor. "It's delicious." Luke sketched a half-smile that barely touched his eyes. "I learned to cook out of necessity. A man alone with a small child doesn't have many options." The words hung between them. A man alone. The absence implied by those words filled the cabin as much as the fire or the furniture. As they ate in silence, Clara observed the interior of the refuge more attentively. It was a simple but clean space. A bed in one corner, a small one in the other, the table, 2 chairs, a cupboard. But what caught her attention were the objects that didn't belong in this rustic environment. A necklace of carved bone beads hanging by the door. A blanket with geometric designs in earth tones covering the small bed. Several ceramic containers decorated with symbols she instantly recognized. Luke followed her gaze. "They were Wiener's," he said simply, like someone sharing a secret that hurts to pronounce. "My wife. She was Kiowa, like—" He stopped, but Clara completed the sentence in her mind. "Like you." Her features always betrayed her, no matter how much she tried to hide them under hats or pulled-back hairstyles. "My father was Kiowa," she confessed, surprising herself with her own sincerity. "My mother was white." Luke nodded, showing neither surprise nor rejection. "Weena died a year ago," he continued, and something in the way he said it, in the tension of his jaw, indicated to Clara that there was more to that story, a pain he wasn't yet ready to share. "I'm very sorry." A silence fell between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence of mutual recognition, of wounds that didn't need to be exposed to be understood. In the dim light of the cabin, amid the scent of pine and the warmth of the fire, Clara felt for the first time in a long time that she didn't have to explain herself, that she didn't have to apologize for existing. And as she watched little Junie sleep, she wondered what had become of her mother, and why this blue-eyed child had chosen her, among all the people on the platform, to ask that impossible question. Dawn arrived with a whitish clarity, filtering through the clouds like spilled milk. Clara woke with a start, disoriented for a moment until memories of the previous day returned to her like fragments of a dream. She had slept in Luke's bed, while he improvised a bed by the fire, a gesture of chivalry that had moved her more than she was willing to admit. The cabin was empty. Through the window, Clara could make out Luke's figure cutting wood, his breath forming small clouds in the cold air. She got up and arranged her hair in an austere bun, trying to regain some of the dignity lost on that desolate platform. As she was about to go out, a weak sob stopped her. Junie was awake, but something wasn't right. The child was burning with fever, her flushed cheeks contrasting with the paleness of the rest of her face. "Where does it hurt, little one?" asked Clara, kneeling beside the small bed. Junie pointed to her throat with trembling fingers. Clara examined the child with the attention of someone who has learned to read the signs of the body. Her father had taught her that illness spoke its own language, and that to cure it you had to learn to listen to it. Junie's breathing was labored, her skin burning. Clara recognized the symptoms, an infection that, without proper treatment, could quickly worsen. When Luke entered, loaded with firewood, his face transformed upon seeing his sick daughter. "It started last night," he explained, dropping the logs. "I thought it would be a passing cold." Clara detected the fear in his voice, the primal fear of a father who had already lost too much. "I need herbs," she said firmly. "Is there a place nearby where I can find St. John's wort and willow bark?" Luke looked at her, surprised. "There's a stream about 10 minutes away surrounded by willows. As for the other herb—" "I'll recognize it if I see it," Clara affirmed. "My father taught me." No more needed to be said. Luke nodded and took his coat. "I'll take you." The nearby forest was a mosaic of light and shadow. Clara walked with concentration, her eyes scrutinizing the ground, the rocks, the fallen trunks. The cold air penetrated her lungs, but she barely noticed it. She was immersed in that silent dialogue with nature that her father had taught her since childhood. There, she finally pointed, stooping to collect yellow flowers growing beside a stump. "And I'll need that one too," she added, indicating a plant with serrated leaves. Luke watched her with a mixture of curiosity and respect. He didn't ask questions, didn't question. He simply followed her, helping her collect what she asked for. Back at the cabin, Clara moved with the confidence of someone performing a familiar ritual. She boiled water, prepared infusions, mashed herbs until forming poultices. "My grandmother used these same plants," Luke commented softly, as Clara applied a compress to Junie's forehead. She was a healer in her village, before they forced her to live on the reservation. Their gazes met over the feverish body of the child. There was understanding in that exchange, a recognition of shared roots that went beyond words. For hours, Clara tended to Junie with a dedication that surprised even herself. She sang to her softly, songs in a language she hadn't used in years, songs her father sang to her when she was ill. The ancestral sound seemed to calm the little girl, who finally fell into a more peaceful sleep. At some point between wakefulness and sleep, Junie opened her eyes and looked at Clara with a clarity that contrasted with her feverish state. "Mommy," she whispered, extending a small hand to touch Clara's face. The word pierced Clara like an arrow, leaving her breathless. She wanted to correct the child, explain that she wasn't her mother, that her mother was gone. But she couldn't. Instead, she took that little hand in hers and kissed it gently. "Rest, little one," she murmured, as a solitary tear rolled down her cheek. "I'll be here when you wake up." The nights in Montana stretched like silver threads, in the darkness. 5 days had passed since Clara's arrival at the Harrison cabin, 5 days that had become an unexpected truce for her wounded heart. Junie was recovering quickly thanks to her care, and the gratitude in Luke's eyes was a balm that healed old wounds. That night, with the little girl already asleep, both shared the warmth of the fire. Clara knitted, using wool that Luke had taken from a trunk. Her fingers moved with agility, creating a small shawl that would be her gift to Junie. "You never told me what brought you to Red Creek," Luke said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence they had established. Clara stopped her, hands for a moment. The question took her back to a reality she had managed to keep at a distance during those days. "A man named Harland Coulter," she finally answered, without raising her eyes from her knitting. "He proposed marriage to me through letters. I sent him my photograph, told him about my life, about my Kiowa father. He assured me it didn't matter, that he only wanted a strong woman by his side to start a new life." Her words floated in the air, laden with a bitterness she tried to disguise as indifference. "But he didn't show up," Luke completed, "and it wasn't a question." Clara nodded, her eyes fixed on the wool that intertwined between her fingers. "It's the 4th time it's happened. 4 men, 4 promises, 4 rejections when they discover that my father's features are more evident than they expected." The silence that followed was charged with an understanding that no words could have expressed better. Luke stood up and added another log to the fire, watching how the flames slowly devoured. "Weena died because I wasn't there to protect her," he said suddenly, with a voice that seemed to come from a very deep place. "I went to Great Falls to sell furs. 3 men entered the cabin, looking for liquor. Finding only a Kiowa woman with her daughter, they decided they could do whatever they wanted." Clara stopped knitting, her heart contracting at the pain contained in those words. Weena hid Junie under the table, told her not to make a noise no matter what happened. Then she confronted those men with a kitchen knife. She told them to get out of her house. They laughed. Luke closed his eyes, as if he could see the scene through his closed eyelids. "When I returned 3 days later, I found Weena." His voice broke. Junie was still under the table, hugging her rag doll, mute with terror. She didn't speak for months. The confession hung between them like an open wound. Clara felt the impulse to approach, to take his hand, to offer some comfort. But she held back. Both were like wounded animals, cautious of contact. "Did they find them? The men, I mean," she finally asked. Luke shook his head. "The sheriff said he would do his best, but we all knew it was a lie. The life of a Kiowa woman isn't worth much in these lands." Clara knew that truth well. She had learned it as a child when her mother had to face rejection from her own family for marrying Nikon. "My father used to say that the white man's justice is like the wind. It always blows in favor of those who have power," she murmured. Luke looked at her, and for the first time since they had met, a genuine smile appeared on his lips. Weena used to say something similar. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the wooden walls. At that moment, amid the confessions and shared pain, something changed between them. It wasn't love, not even attraction. It was a deeper recognition, that of two souls that had been marked by the same type of scars. "You should stay," Luke said, suddenly. "At least until winter passes. Red Creek isn't a good place to travel alone when the snows come." Clara knew she should reject the offer, that staying longer would only make the farewell more difficult, especially for Junie, who had grown fond of her. But as the wind howled outside, beating against the cabin windows, the idea of a refuge, even if temporary, was too tempting. "I'll stay until I find a way to continue my journey," she finally responded, resuming her knitting. "And in exchange, I'll help you with Junie and with the house." It wasn't a promise for the future. It was just an agreement between two survivors who recognized in each other the same will to move forward, despite everything. October advanced with firm steps, painting the forests red and gold. Clara had found a rhythm in life with Luke and Junie, a daily routine she had never known. Her days were filled with small tasks: cooking, cleaning, tending to the garden that languished with the arrival of autumn, collecting herbs before the cold withered them completely. That morning, while Luke was in town selling furs, Clara decided to organize the small chest where she kept her few belongings. Among the fabrics and objects she had brought with her, she found a package wrapped in suede leather. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing pieces of fabric of different colors and textures. "What is that?" asked Junie, always curious, approaching her. "They're patches to make a quilt," explained Clara, spreading the fabrics on the bed. "My mother started making it when I was little. Each piece tells a story." Clara's fingers caressed a fragment of faded blue cotton. "This was from the dress my mother wore the day she met my father. And this," she pointed to a piece of reddish wool, "was from the blanket that wrapped me when I was born." Junie listened, fascinated, her little eyes bright with interest. She took a piece of fabric printed with small flowers and examined it carefully. "And this one?" Clara smiled. "That's from the first dress my mother made me when I turned 7. For hours," Clara shared with Junie, the stories interwoven in those fabric fragments. Tales of her childhood in a small cabin not unlike this one, of her father teaching her to track animals in the forest, of her mother singing songs in English as she sewed by candlelight. Without realizing it, time passed, and when Luke returned, he found Clara and Junie sitting on the floor, surrounded by colorful patches, as if they had created a small garden in the middle of the room. "We're making a quilt of stories," announced Junie with enthusiasm. "Clara says we can add our own fabrics." Luke observed the scene with an expression Clara couldn't decipher. There was something in his eyes, a mixture of gratitude and fear, as if he were witnessing something precious and fragile that could break at any moment. "There are fabrics in Weena's trunk," he finally said with a soft voice. "She also sewed. I think she would like you to use them." Those words, simple but laden with meaning, caused a lump in Clara's throat. It wasn't just permission to use his late wife's fabrics. It was an invitation to enter a part of his life that he had kept closed until then. That night, after Junie fell asleep, Clara continued working on the quilt by the firelight. Luke watched her in silence as he carved a small wooden horse, a gift he was preparing for his daughter's birthday. "My grandmother had a quilt like that," he commented, without taking his eyes off his carving. "She said it was a map of her life." Clara nodded, threading the needle with precision. "That's what my mother said too, that women carry our stories in the seams, not in books. Do you miss her?" The question surprised her, not for its content, but for the softness with which it was formulated, as if Luke had learned to read her silences. "Every day," she admitted. "She died 3 years ago. My father followed her 6 months later. I think his heart simply refused to keep beating without her." The crackling of the firefly Sized the silence that followed. Clara continued sewing, joining a piece of raw linen with one of dark blue velvet. "Sometimes I think I should hate them," Luke said suddenly, setting aside his carving. "The men who killed Weena. But hatred is like a poison you drink yourself, hoping it will kill someone else." Clara looked up. The flames cast dancing shadows on Luke's face, highlighting the lines that suffering had etched on him. "My father used to say something similar," she responded. "That hatred is a fire that consumes you from within, until nothing is left." "Your father seems to have been a wise man." "He was, and brave. He faced rejection from everyone to be with my mother." Luke nodded, understanding the weight of those words. He too had known rejection for loving a Kiowa woman, for defending that love in a society that considered it an aberration. "Do you know what I miss most about Weena?" he asked, his gaze lost in the flames. Her laugh. She had a way of laughing that made everything seem possible, even in the worst moments. Clara set aside her sewing, and in a gesture that surprised them both, extended her hand to take Luke's. There were no words, none were necessary. In that simple contact, in that bridge stretched between two solitudes, there was more comfort than in any elaborate phrase. Through the window, the full moon bathed the clearing with its silver light. Clara thought about the paths that had led her there, about the disappointments that now seemed like necessary steps to reach this moment. And as her fingers remained intertwined with Luke's, she wondered if she had finally found a place to belong. The first snow arrived in late October, covering the world with a blanket of white silence. Clara had grown accustomed to her routine in the cabin, waking before dawn, preparing breakfast, helping Luke with daily chores, teaching Junie the songs and stories her father had passed down to her. A simple life that, nevertheless, was beginning to fill the voids that disappointments had left in her soul. That morning, Luke had gone out early to check his traps. The snow made hunting more difficult, but it also left more evident tracks of animals that had not yet hibernated. "Let's look for berries to dye the wool," Clara proposed to Junie as they cleared the breakfast dishes. "I know a bush that keeps its fruits even with the first snow." The child jumped enthusiastically. Any excursion with Clara became an adventure, where she learned about plants, animals, and the ancient stories of the Kiowa. They bundled up well. Clara wrapped Junie in the blanket she had finished knitting for her, making sure she was protected from the cold. Then they took a small basket and ventured into the forest. The winter landscape had an overwhelming beauty. The trees, covered in snow, looked like sleeping giants. The silence was so deep that they could hear the crunch of snow under their boots, the occasional flutter of a bird, the whisper of wind between the bare branches. "Where is the magic bush?" asked Junie, her voice small in the white immensity. Clara smiled at the description. "Near the stream. The berries are such an intense red that they look like drops of blood on the snow. My father said they were tears of an ancient goddess who cried for her lost lover." Junie looked at her with admiration. For her, Clara had become an inexhaustible source of wonderful stories, so different from the simple tales her father told her before bed. They reached the stream, which flowed more swiftly than usual due to the partial thaw of snow in the mountains. Its banks were covered with a thin layer of ice that extended like white lace over the stones. "There they are," Clara pointed, indicating a bush growing near the bank, its branches laden with small scarlet berries. They approached carefully. The terrain was treacherous, slippery from the half-melted snow. Clara began to collect the berries, placing them in the basket that Junie held with gloved hands. "They're beautiful," murmured the child, observing how the color slightly stained Clara's fingers. "With them we'll dye wool to make a new hat for your father," explained Clara, "one that matches his eyes." Junie smiled, delighted with the idea of a gift for Luke. While Clara continued collecting, the child walked a few steps away, attracted by the shine of ice on the edge of the stream. "Look, Clara, it looks like a magic mirror." It happened in an instant. A crack, a muffled cry, and then the sound that would freeze Clara's blood, the splash of a small body falling into the icy water. "Junie!" Clara turned just in time to see the child disappear beneath the surface of the stream. Without thinking, she dropped the basket and ran toward the water. The cold hit her like 1,000 knives when she submerged, But the terror for Junie was stronger than any physical pain. The current was treacherous, faster than it seemed from the bank. Clara swam desperately, fighting against the numbness that began to take over her extremities. Her eyes burned as she scanned the murky water, looking for a flash of Junie's red coat. Finally, she saw her, a motionless bulk that the current was dragging toward an area of rapids. With the last strength she had left, Clara swam toward her, reaching her just before the stream carried her further. She grabbed the child by the waist and began to swim toward the shore, but her legs barely responded, and the weight of the soaked clothes threatened to sink them both. "Hold on, Junie," she whispered, though the little girl seemed unconscious. "I won't let you go." The shore seemed unreachable. Clara felt how the cold penetrated to her bones, how her movements became slower, more clumsy. For a moment, a terrible thought crossed her mind. Both would die there in those icy waters, and Luke would find their bodies when it was too late. It was then that she heard it, the desperate cry of a man. Through the mist that began to cloud her vision, Clara made out the figure of Luke running toward the stream, throwing off his coat without stopping. The next thing she knew was that strong arms were holding her, dragging her along with Junie toward the shore. The world became a whirlwind of confused sensations, the relentless cold, Luke's agitated breathing, the motionless weight of Junie between them. "Breathe, for God's sake, breathe!" Luke's voice came distorted, as if through a tunnel. Clara tried to speak, to tell him she was fine, to take care of Junie, but her lips wouldn't obey. An uncontrollable shiver took over her body as Luke dragged them both over the snow, away from the treacherous stream. With frantic movements, Luke turned Junie face down, gently hitting her back until the child coughed up water and began to cough. The sound of that weak cough was the most beautiful melody Clara had ever heard. "Thank God," murmured Luke, hugging his daughter against his chest. "Thank God." Then he turned to Clara, who lay trembling in the snow, her clothes rapidly freezing. On her body. "Clara, look at me," he ordered, with an intensity that pierced through the fog that was settling over her consciousness. "Stay with me, do you hear me? Don't you dare leave us." She wanted to respond, to assure him she wouldn't go anywhere, but darkness enveloped her before she could utter a word. The last thing she would remember afterward was the sensation of being lifted in arms, the strong beat of a heart against her cheek, and a voice that repeated her name like a prayer, over and over, guiding her back through the deep waters of unconsciousness. Time lost its meaning for Clara. She floated in a limbo between consciousness and darkness, where fragments of reality intermingled with feverish dreams. Sometimes she was a child again, running through the fields with her father. Other times she saw herself on that desolate platform in Red Creek, eternally waiting for a man who would never come. In the brief moments of lucidity, she perceived the dimly lit cabin, felt the burning heat of the blankets covering her, heard muffled voices discussing around her. "Pneumonia," said an unknown voice, grave and authoritative. "She has breathed icy water, and the cold has done the rest." "Will she recover?" Luke's voice tense like a rope about to break. "If she survives tonight, perhaps, but I can't promise anything. I've seen strong men succumb with less." A heavy silence, and then Junie asks about her constantly. "I don't know what to tell her." "Tell her the truth, Harrison, that Miss Whitford is fighting for her life and that only God knows if she will win that battle." Footsteps receding, a door closing, then the sensation of a large, rough hand taking hers, so hot against her frozen skin. "Don't you dare give up, Clara." Luke's voice, so close she could feel his breath on her cheek. "Junie needs you. I need you." The confession hung in the air, but Clara had already sunk back into darkness, where words dissolved like snow in the sun. It was thirst that finally brought her back to the world of the living, a burning thirst that scorched her throat as if she had swallowed embers. She tried to speak, but only managed to emit a weak moan. She opened her eyes slowly. The light hurt her like 1,000 needles, forcing her to blink several times until the room stopped being a confused blur. Luke was leaning over her, his face haggard from lack of sleep, his beard more grown and unkempt. "Water," she managed to articulate, her voice barely a hoarse whisper. Luke hurried to hold a glass against her parched lips. The cool liquid was the most delicious nectar she had ever tasted. "How long?" she asked after drinking. 4 days, Luke replied without moving, from her side. Dr. Miller said it was a miracle you were still alive after so much time in the icy water. Memories returned like scattered fragments. The red berries, Junie's scream, the paralyzing cold of the stream. "Junie?" she asked, trying to sit up and feeling a stab of pain in her chest that forced her to lie down again. "She's fine. She had a bit of a fever, but she recovered quickly. Children are stronger than they seem." A weak smile formed on Clara's lips. "And more reckless, too." Luke took her hand between his with a delicacy that contrasted with his rugged appearance. "I owe you my daughter's life," he said with a deep voice. "You risked yours to save her. I can never repay that." Clara shook her head slightly. "There is no debt. Anyone would have done the same." "No, Clara, not anyone. Most would have run to seek help, and by then it would have been too late." Their gazes met, and in Luke's eyes there was something new, a warmth, an admiration that went beyond gratitude. "I thought I would lose you," he confessed, in a whisper so low that Clara barely heard it. "When I pulled you from the water, you were so cold, so pale." He didn't finish the sentence. It wasn't necessary. Clara then understood what had been developing between them during those weeks, a bond that transcended words, forged in shared pain and mutual understanding, in those comfortable silences by the fire. "I'm not going anywhere," she murmured, weakly squeezing Luke's hand. "Not while you need me." It was a simple promise, without adornments or grandiose vows. But in that cabin lost in the mountains of Montana, with winter wind beating against the windows and snow accumulating on the roof, those words had the weight of a sacred commitment. "Rest," said Luke, arranging the blankets around her. "Junie will want to see you when you wake up. She hasn't stopped asking about you." Clara closed her eyes, feeling an overwhelming fatigue. But this time, the sleep that claimed her was not the threatening darkness of fever, but a restorative rest that promised a waking. Before fully immersing in it, she felt Luke's lips brush her forehead in a gesture so tender that tears came to her closed eyes. "Thank you for coming back," he whispered against her skin, and although she no longer had the strength to respond, in her heart Clara knew she had returned not only from the icy waters of the stream, but from a life of rejections and solitudes. She had returned to a home she didn't know she was looking for. Winter settled with all its force over Montana. The cabin was practically isolated for weeks, surrounded by snow that accumulated until reaching the height of the windows. But inside, the warmth of the home kept at bay not only the exterior cold, but also the ghosts of the past. Clara's recovery was slow. The pneumonia had weakened her body more than she was willing to admit. For days, she could barely get out of bed, and when she did, the effort left her exhausted. Luke and Junie became her dedicated nurses. The child brought her cups of herbal tea, sang her the songs Clara had taught her, as if the roles had been reversed. Luke prepared nutritious broths and read to her on the long winter nights, his deep voice giving life to the worn pages of the few books he owned. One January morning, when the sun reflected off the snow, creating a world of diamonds, Clara felt strong enough to sit by the window. Wrapped in blankets, she watched Luke and Junie build a snowman in the clearing. The child's laughter reached her like music, clear and pure in the cold air. "It's the first time I've heard her laugh like that since Weena died," Luke said that night, as they shared a cup of coffee by the fire. "It's as if she's finally allowing herself to be a child again." Clara smiled, her hands cradling the hot cup. "Children are like grass after a fire," she responded. "They always find a way to grow back, to regain their greenness, if given the chance." Luke observed her with that look he had begun to reserve only for her, a mixture of admiration and something deeper that neither of them dared to name yet. "And adults?" he asked softly. "Can we also be reborn after burning ourselves?" The question floated between them, laden with implicit meanings. Clara contemplated the fire for a long moment before responding. "My father used to say that even the oldest trees can turn green again after the hardest winter. They just need patience and faith that spring will eventually come." Their gazes met over the dancing flames, and in that instant, something changed between them. There were no words or gestures, just a silent understanding, an unspoken promise to wait together for that spring. As February progressed, Clara regained her strength. She began to resume her tasks in the cabin, though Luke insisted she not overexert herself. The dynamic between them had acquired a new dimension, a comfortable familiarity, interwoven with moments of electric tension when their hands accidentally brushed, or when their gazes met for a second longer than necessary. One afternoon, while sorting seeds for future planting, Junie asked the question that had been floating in the air for weeks. "Clara, will you stay with us forever?" Silence fell over the room like a heavy blanket. Luke stopped carving the wooden figurine he was working on, his eyes fixed on Clara, holding his breath. Clara looked at the child, whose blue eyes watched her with a mixture of hope and fear. Then at Luke, whose face tried to maintain a neutral expression, but whose eyes revealed a vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to show. "I'll stay as long as you want me here," she finally answered, choosing each word carefully. "I want you. Here forever," Junie declared with the bluntness of children. "And so does Dad, right, Dad?" Luke cleared his throat, his large hands suddenly clumsy with the knife and wood. "Yes," he said simply, and in that single syllable there was more sincerity than in all the love poems Clara had ever read. That night, after Junie fell asleep, Luke found Clara sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, contemplating the stars that shone with supernatural intensity in the clear winter sky. "You'll catch cold again," he warned, sitting beside her. "The fresh air does me good," she replied, without taking her eyes off the firmament. "It reminds me that I'm alive." Luke nodded, understanding. After coming so close to death, each breath, even those that hurt from the cold, was a precious reminder of the life that continued. "About what Junie said today," Luke began, his voice tinged with an uncertainty unusual for him. "It doesn't have to mean anything you don't want it to mean," Clara interrupted, anticipating what she thought he would say. "I understand that Junie has grown fond of me, but it's not just Junie." Luke cut her off, turning to look at her directly. "I don't want you to stay as our guest, or as the woman who takes care of my daughter." Clara held her breath, her heart accelerating like a trapped bird's. "What do you want then?" Luke took a breath, as if gathering courage to pronounce words he had been keeping for weeks. "I want you to stay as my companion, as my wife, if someday you could consider that idea." The confession hung in the cold night air, crystalline and fragile like a snowflake. Clara felt a warmth spread from her chest to her cheeks, despite the icy wind that blew. "Luke, She hesitated, searching for the right words. "It's been such a short time. You still carry Weena in your heart, and I will always carry Weena in my heart," he affirmed gently, "as you carry your parents. But that doesn't mean there isn't room for something new, something different, but equally valuable." His hands, rough from hard work, found Clara's under the blanket. "I'm not asking for an answer now," he continued. "I just want you to know that when I was about to lose you in that stream, I realized I can no longer imagine a life without you. And it's not gratitude, Clara. It's something that was growing long before, from the first night you spent in this cabin." Clara observed their intertwined hands, thinking about all the paths that had led her to that porch, under that starry sky. The rejections, the humiliations, the broken hopes, everything now seemed part of a greater design, of a tapestry whose pattern was only revealed when looking back. "When I arrived in Red Creek," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper, "I believed my last chance at happiness had vanished, that I was destined to wander alone, too white for the Kiowa, too Kiowa for the whites. And then Junie asked me if I could be her mother forever." She paused, moved by the memory. "And I found a home where I least expected it," she completed, raising her gaze to meet Luke's eyes. "I don't know what the future holds for us, but I know I want to discover it by your side." It wasn't a formal acceptance of his proposal, but something deeper, a commitment, a mutual promise to build together whatever might come. Luke brought a hand to Clara's face, caressing her cheek with a tenderness that contrasted with the roughness of his calloused fingers. Slowly, as if giving time for retreat, he leaned toward her. Their first kiss tasted of coffee, firewood, and promises. It was brief and chaste, but it contained the seed of a passion that both knew would bloom when spring arrived, both in the earth and in their hearts. As they separated, Luke rested his forehead against Clara's, his eyes closed, like someone who finally finds shelter after a long storm. "Spring will come," she murmured, repeating the implicit promise in their earlier conversation. And as the winter wind whistled around the cabin, bringing with it the scent of pines and snow, both knew that somehow spring had already begun to awaken within them. March arrived with capricious winds that brought both snowstorms and surprisingly warm days. The earth was slowly awakening, like an animal emerging from hibernation, stretching lazily under the increasingly strong sun. Clara had started a small improvised greenhouse by the south window of the cabin. Small trays with dark soil housed seeds that she and Junie had carefully planted, tomatoes, peppers, medicinal herbs that her father had taught her to cultivate. "How do seeds know when it's time to grow?" asked Junie one morning, as she observed the first green shoots timidly emerging. "From the soil." Clara smiled, stroking the child's hair. "They carry wisdom within," she replied. "They know to wait for the right moment, when the earth is warm enough and there is sufficient light. It's an ancient wisdom, as old as the world itself." "Like you and Dad," affirmed Junie with the disconcerting simplicity of children. "You were also waiting for the right moment." The observation left Clara speechless for an instant. Then she laughed softly, amazed by the little girl's insight. "Yes, I suppose so. Sometimes people also need time and the right conditions to flourish together." The weeks passed with a new cadence. Luke and Clara had established a routine that reflected their growing intimacy. Shared breakfasts before dawn, when Junie was still asleep, and they could talk in low voices about their dreams and hopes. Walks in the forest on milder days, their hands meeting almost timidly. Nights by the fire, increasingly closer to each other, until finally Clara would fall asleep with her head resting on Luke's shoulder, while he stroked her hair with reverent tenderness. They hadn't explicitly spoken of marriage again. It was as if both had silently agreed to let their relationship blossom at its own pace, without forcing or labeling it. But the inhabitants of Red Creek, during Luke's sporadic visits to town, had begun to notice changes in him. He smiled more, bought fabrics and ribbons that were clearly not for Junie, and on one memorable occasion acquired a hand mirror with a polished silver handle, a luxury that the austere Luke Harrison would never have allowed himself before. One afternoon, when the first patches of bare earth began to appear between the melting snow, Clara decided to accompany Luke to town. It was the first time she was returning to Red Creek since that fateful afternoon on the platform, and the prospect filled her with apprehension. "You don't have to come if you don't feel ready," Luke told her as he loaded the cart with furs and items to trade. Clara shook her head, adjusting her wool shawl over her shoulders. "It's time to face the ghosts," she replied with determination. "Besides, we need supplies that you alone couldn't carry." The journey to town passed between light conversations and comfortable silences. Junie, seated between them on the driver's seat of the cart, chatted about the squirrels she had seen that morning and about how she planned to build a house for them when the snow completely disappeared. Red Creek appeared before them like a worn postcard, a main street flanked by wooden buildings, some freshly painted, others faded by the passage of time. The train station, which meant so much to Clara, stood at one end as a silent reminder of her arrival. The looks began as soon as they entered the town. Curious eyes followed them as they advanced down the main street. The widower Harrison, the mysterious mixed-race woman, and little Junie, a trio that defied established conventions. "Don't pay them any mind," Luke murmured, noticing the tension in Clara's shoulders. "Their opinions are worth less than the dust on the road." But even with these comforting words, Clara felt the weight of the gazes like stones on her back. She reminded herself that she was no longer the woman abandoned on the platform. Now she had a purpose, a place she belonged, people who valued her for who she was, not despite it. The first stop was the general store. Upon entering, silence fell like a heavy blanket over the conversations that were taking place inside. The owner, a middle-aged man with a thick mustache, was momentarily speechless when he saw Luke enter with Clara and Junie. "Harrison," he finally greeted with a curt nod. "What can I do for you today?" Luke began to list the supplies they needed, while Clara and Junie browsed the shelves. The child pointed enthusiastically at the candies in glass jars, while Clara examined fabrics and household items. "Look, Dad," exclaimed Junie, pointing to a small painted wooden horse. "It's like the one you made me, but it has colors." Luke approached, crouching beside his daughter. "Yours is prettier," he assured her, winking, "because I made it thinking." "Of you?" Clara was watching the scene with a smile when a female voice behind her startled her. "So you're the Indian woman who's living with Luke Harrison." She turned to find herself facing a woman in her 40s, dressed with simple elegance, her blonde hair gathered in a severe bun. "I'm Clara May Whitford," she responded with dignity, refusing to be intimidated. "And yes, I live with the Harrisons." But the woman scrutinized her from head to toe, not bothering to disguise her disdain. "This is a decent community, Miss Whitford. We don't look kindly upon certain arrangements." Clara felt the heat rise to her cheeks, but before she could respond, Luke was at her side, his presence like a protective wall. "Mrs. Bennet," he greeted, with a coldness Clara had never heard from him. "I see you've met my fiancé." The word fell like a stone in a pond, creating waves of surprise that spread throughout the store. Mrs. Bennet visibly paled. "Your fiancé," she repeated, as if the words were incomprehensible. "But Luke, after what happened to Weena—" "Precisely. Because of what happened to Weena," Luke interrupted, his voice firm but controlled. "I know how to recognize what truly matters in this life, and it's not the opinions of those who believe they have the right to judge others." He took Clara's hand in his, a deliberate gesture that didn't go unnoticed by anyone in the store. Clara saved Junie's life when she fell into the stream this winter. She almost lost hers in the process. That tells me everything I need to know about her. Mrs. Bennet seemed momentarily speechless. Then, with an indignant snort, she moved away to the back of the store. The rest of the visit passed in a tense silence. As they loaded the supplies into the cart, Clara finally found her voice. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "Call. Me your fiancé, I mean." Luke stopped what he was doing and looked at her directly. "I didn't do it for them," he responded seriously. "I did it because it's how I feel, because it's what I want. Unless you don't—" Clara quickly shook her head, her heart accelerating. "No, it's not that. It's just that I don't want you to feel forced to formalize something because of town gossip." Luke took her face between his calloused hands, with a delicacy that contrasted with his rugged appearance. "Clara May Whitford, nothing that this town or any other might say could force me to do something I don't desire with all my heart. I am asking you here and now to be my wife, not for appearances, not for convenience, but because I cannot imagine my life without you by my side." Tears clouded Clara's vision. All the disappointments, all the rejections she had suffered now seemed part of a necessary path to reach this moment. "Yes," she responded simply, with a voice that barely concealed the emotion. "Yes, Luke Harrison, I will be your wife." The smile that illuminated Luke's face was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. In an impulsive gesture, he lifted Clara by the waist and spun her in the air, provoking the surprised laughter of Junie, who watched the scene with bright eyes. "Does that mean Clara will be my real mom?" asked the child, jumping with excitement. Luke put Clara down and knelt before his daughter. "Only if you want, little one." Junie seemed to consider the question with all the seriousness in the world. Then, with decision, she nodded. "I think Mom sent her to us," she declared, with the unshakable certainty of childhood. From heaven. Clara knelt beside Luke, taking Junie's small hands in hers. "I won't replace your mum, Junie," she said gently. "No one could do that, but I promise to love and care for you as if you were mine." The child hugged her tightly, and in that embrace there was an acceptance so pure that tears returned to Clara's eyes. As they returned to the cabin with the afternoon sun gilding the field still partially covered with snow, Clara contemplated Luke's profile against the bright sky. In his eyes, she saw not only the man she had chosen as her companion, but also the reflection of a future she never thought possible, a home, a family, a place where her mixed heritage was not a condemnation but a gift. Like the seed she had planted by the window, her heart was also blooming, unfolding under the warmth of a love that had arrived when she no longer expected it, April spread its palette of colors over the fields of Montana. The first green shoots emerged from the damp earth, and birds returned from their winter journeys, filling the air with their songs. In the Harrison cabin, another type of rebirth was underway. Clara had spread on the bed the quilt she had been sewing for months. The patches of her life and Luke's intertwined in a pattern that told the story of two paths that finally met. Pieces of her old dresses coexisted with fragments of Luke's worn shirts, creating a textile cartography of their separate lives and their joint future. Junie, seated beside her, ran her fingers over the different textures, fascinated. "This is from the dress you wore when you arrived, right?" she asked, pointing to a piece of faded blue cotton. Clara nodded, caressing the fabric with nostalgia. "And this one," she indicated a piece of red fabric with small embroidered flowers, "was from a blanket that belonged to your mother. Your father allowed me to use it." The child smiled, pleased to recognize the pattern. "It will be as if Mom were also at our wedding," she declared with simplicity. The wedding would be held in 2 weeks with the arrival of the full moon. It wouldn't be a conventional ceremony. Luke and Clara had decided to unite according to Kiowa traditions with elements of Western customs that both considered significant. There would be no church or religious officiant, but a circle of stones and an exchange of promises under the open sky. Few people were invited. Dr. Miller, who had attended to Clara during her illness, old Sam Thunder, a Kiowa who lived on the outskirts of Red Creek and who had been a friend of Clara's father, and 2 neighboring families who, unlike most in the town, had shown respect toward the couple. "Can I add something to the quilt?" asked Junie, taking out of her pocket a small handkerchief embroidered with her initials. Clara looked at her with surprise. "Are you sure? Your grandmother gave it to you for your birthday." Junie nodded with determination. "I want it to be there, with all the important things." With tenderness, Clara took the handkerchief and placed it in the center of the quilt, where there was still an empty space. "It will be the heart of our home," she said, hugging the child. As they worked on the quilt, Clara thought about how her life had changed since that day on the platform. The desperate and humiliated woman she had been now seemed a distant memory, as if belonging to someone else. In her place had emerged a Clara she hadn't known before, confident, loved, with a purpose. Luke entered the room, bringing with him the scent of the forest and freshly plowed earth. He stopped at the threshold, observing Clara and Junie bent over. "The multicolored quilt, may I see?" he asked, approaching. Clara nodded, making room for him on the bed. Luke sat down, his eyes traveling over the intricate work that told without words the story of their lives. "It's beautiful," he murmured, his calloused fingers gently touching the seams. "Like the women creating it." Junie smiled, proud to be included in the compliment. Then, with the intuition of children who know when adults need to talk alone, she announced she would go see if the seeds had grown since morning. When they were alone, Luke took something from his pocket, a small object, wrapped in a piece of suede. "I wanted to give you this before the ceremony," he said, his voice deeper than usual. "It was my mother's." Clara unwrapped the package carefully. In her hands remained a simple silver ring with a small garnet set that shone like a drop of crystallized blood. "Luke," she whispered, moved. "It's beautiful. My father gave it to her when they decided to come west," he explained. "He said that the red of the garnet symbolized the fire they would keep alive in their new home." With delicacy, he took Clara's hand and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "Now you will keep our fire alive," he murmured, bringing Clara's hand to his lips. The intimacy of the moment enveloped them like a warm mantle. Since they had formally committed, their relationship had acquired a new dimension. Touches were more frequent, gazes more intense, conversations deeper. However, both had tacitly agreed to wait until after the ceremony to consummate their union. "I have something for you, too," said Clara, rising to search for something in the trunk where she kept her few belongings. She returned with an object wrapped in a suede cloth, similar to the one that had contained the ring. Luke unwrapped it, revealing a carved bone pendant with intricate Kiowa symbols. "It was my father's," explained Clara. He carved it himself during the first winter he spent with my mother. The symbols represent protection and fertility. Luke ran his fingers over the delicate engravings, clearly moved by the gift. "I will wear it with pride," he said, placing it around his neck. They looked at each other in silence, aware that they were interweaving not only their lives, but also their heritages, their cultures, their pasts. Like the quilt Clara was sewing, their union would be a mosaic of different textures and colors, but with a cohesive design that belonged uniquely to them. That night, as Junie slept, Luke and Clara sat on the porch, contemplating the crescent moon that bathed the fields with its silver light. Spring advanced with determined steps, unfolding new shoots each day like promises of renewed life. "Are you afraid?" Luke asked suddenly. Clara looked at him, surprised by the question. "Of marrying you?" "No," she responded with sincerity. "But I do fear what the future might bring. The world is not always kind to couples like us." Luke nodded, understanding her concerns. "When Weena was alive, we also faced prejudice," he admitted. "But I learned that the opinion of those who don't really know you doesn't deserve the power to ruin your happiness." Clara rested her head on his shoulder, comforted by the solidity of his presence. "My mother used to say that true love isn't blind, but sees beyond what others can see," she murmured. "Your mother was a wise woman," Luke responded, kissing her forehead, "like her daughter." They remained like that, in silence, letting the night spread its mantle over them. In 2 weeks they would be husband and wife, officially a family. But, in their hearts, the bond was already sealed, as firm and permanent as the mountains that rose on the horizon. As sleep began to claim them, Clara thought of the half-finished quilt that rested on the bed. There was still space in it, blank spaces that would be filled with new stories, new experiences, new beginnings, like their life together, a canvas on which they would continue to embroider day after day the story of their improbable and perfect love. The day dawned clear and bright, as if the sky itself had decided to bless the union of Clara and Luke. The April full moon, known by the Kiowa as the moon of nascent flowers, would illuminate their ceremony that night. Clara was in the small room that had been hers for the past few months, observing her reflection in the mirror Luke had given her. She wore a simple dress that she had made herself, white as Western tradition dictated, but adorned with beads and embroidery that followed Kiowa patterns, a perfect symbol of the union of their two worlds. Nancy Miller, the doctor's wife, was helping her arrange her hair, intertwining small wildflowers among her dark braids. "I've never seen Luke so happy," commented the woman, adjusting a flower. "Not even when he was with Weena, and he loved her deeply." Clara lowered her gaze, a blush coloring her cheeks. "Sometimes I worry I can't honor her memory as I should," she confessed softly. "Weena was Junie's mother, his first love." Nancy placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "The human heart is not like a cup that can only be filled once," she said wisely. "It's like a garden that can bloom again, with different but equally beautiful flowers." Clara nodded, grateful for the words. Since they had announced their marriage, she had experienced a confusing mixture of emotions, overflowing joy, nervousness, but also a strange sense of guilt, as if she were usurping another woman's place. "Ready," announced Nancy, stepping back to admire her work. "You look beautiful, Clara." At that moment, the door opened and Junie came running in, her own light blue dress fluttering around her. "Clara," she exclaimed, stopping short when she saw her. "You look like a princess from the stories." Clara knelt down, opening her arms to receive the child. "And you look like a forest fairy," she responded, adjusting a ribbon in Junie's hair. "The most beautiful of all." The little girl smiled, proud, and then her expression turned serious. "Dad is nervous," she informed in a conspiratorial whisper. "He's changed his shirt 3 times. Clara and Nancy exchanged an amused look. The image of the stoic Luke Harrison, nervous as a teenager at his first dance, was as unexpected as it was endearing. "Tell him I'm nervous too," Clara responded, kissing Junie's forehead, "but that I wouldn't change this day for anything in the world." By mid-afternoon, the few guests began to arrive. Sam Thunder, with his hair as white as snow and his face furrowed by the wrinkles of almost 8 decades of life, was the first. When he saw Clara, his ancient eyes lit up with recognition. "You look like your father," he said in Kiowa, taking Clara's hands between his. He would be proud. Clara felt tears threatening to ruin Nancy's work. "Thank you for coming, Sam," she responded in the same language. "It means a lot to me to have someone here who knew my family," the old man nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I will guide the ceremony as your father would have wanted," he promised. When the sun began to descend, painting the sky with orange and golden hues, everyone headed toward the clearing near the cabin. Luke had arranged a circle of stones, in whose center burned a small fire. Around it, torches stuck in the ground waited to be lit when darkness fell completely. Clara remained at the edge of the forest, as tradition dictated, waiting to be called. Her heart beat strongly, not from fear or doubt, but from the intensity of the moment. From there she could see Luke standing by the fire, dressed in his best clothes, white shirt, dark vest, clean pants. He had trimmed his beard and combed his hair, but he was still the same strong and genuine man who had welcomed her that day at the station. Sam Thunder began to intone a traditional chant, his elderly but firm voice rising in the stillness of dusk. It was an invocation to the spirits of the ancestors, asking them to bless the union. When the chant ended, Junie approached Clara, carrying a small wicker basket full of petals. "It's time," she announced with seriousness, taking Clara's hand. "Dad is waiting." Together they walked toward the circle, Junie scattering petals in their path. Clara felt each beat of her heart, each breath, with an almost painful intensity. This was her moment, the instant when her life would change forever. Upon entering the circle, her eyes found Luke's. The look they exchanged contained more than words. There were promises, hopes, a shared future that stretched before them like a path illuminated by the moon that was beginning to appear on the horizon. Sam indicated for the couple to stand before the fire, one on each side, so that the flames danced between them. "The fire represents life," explained the old man, alternating between English and Kiowa so all present could understand. "Like fire, love needs to be fed, cared for, protected from wind and rain. But also, like fire, love provides warmth, light, and the power to transform." Luke and Clara looked at each other through the flames, the old man's words sinking deep into their hearts. "Luke Harrison," continued Sam, "do you accept Clara May Whitford as your life companion, to walk by her side on days of sun and nights of storm, to build with her a home where respect and love are the foundations?" "I accept," Luke responded, his voice firm and clear in the stillness of dusk. "Clara May Whitford, do you accept Luke Harrison as your life companion, to walk by his side on days of sun and nights of storm, to build with him a home where respect and love are the foundations?" "I accept," Clara responded, surprised by the firmness of her own voice when she felt her heart might burst with emotion. Sam nodded, satisfied. "Now, according to tradition, you will exchange gifts that symbolize your commitment." Luke put his hand in his pocket and took out a small object wrapped in cloth. Unwrapping it, Clara saw a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a flower. "This brooch belonged to my grandmother," explained Luke, his voice slightly trembling. "She wore it during 50 years of marriage to my grandfather. It is a symbol of constancy and dedication, values that I promised to bring to our union." Clara accepted the brooch, deeply moved by the meaning of the gift. Then, from a small hidden pocket in her dress, she extracted her own gift, an eagle feather mounted on a leather base, decorated with beads. "My father received this feather when he was young as a symbol of courage and vision," she explained. "The eagle feather reminds us that we must see beyond the immediate, contemplate the complete picture, like the eagle that flies high. I give it to you as a promise that I will always try to see the world with clarity and height." Luke took the feather with reverence, understanding the profound meaning of the gift. Sam Thunder then indicated that they should approach the fire and join their hands above the flames. "The fire seals your promises," he declared. "May your love burn with the same strength, illuminating not only your lives but also those of those around you." It was then that Junie, who had been observing everything with bright eyes, stepped forward. "I also have a gift," she announced, taking from her. Pocket a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. Sam smiled, indicating that she should proceed. The child approached and extended her gift toward Clara and Luke. Upon unwrapping it, they revealed a small figure carved in wood, 3 silhouettes holding hands. "It's us," explained Junie. "A family." Clara knelt, hugging the child tightly, unable to contain her tears. Luke joined the embrace, physically forming the image that the wooden figure represented. When they separated, Sam Thunder raised his hands toward the sky, where the full moon already shone with all its splendor. "By the power of the fire that burns, of the earth that sustains, of the water that flows, and of the air that you breathe, I declare Luke and Clara united in marriage," he proclaimed. "May the moon of nascent flowers bless your union with fertility, prosperity, and lasting love." The few present applauded as Luke circled the fire to take Clara in his arms. Their first kiss as husband and wife was soft and reverent, a promise sealed under the silver gaze of the moon. The small celebration that followed was full of music, food, and laughter. Dr. Miller played an old violin, while his wife had prepared a feast that included both traditional Western dishes and some that Sam Thunder had brought, prepared according to Kiowa recipes. As the night progressed, the guests began to say goodbye. Junie, exhausted by the day's excitement, had fallen asleep, on a blanket beside the fire. Luke lifted her carefully, and together with Clara they took her back to the cabin. After putting the child to bed, husband and wife found themselves alone for the first time since the ceremony. In the room they would now share, illuminated only by the light of an oil lamp, they looked at each other with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. "Wife," murmured Luke, savoring the word as if it were new in his language. "Husband," Clara responded with a shy smile. With delicacy, Luke took Clara's face between his hands. "Today is just the beginning," he promised, his voice deep with emotion. "Each day we will build together this life we have chosen." Clara closed her eyes, letting herself be enveloped by the warmth of his words, of his hands, of his presence. All the broken pieces of her life finally seemed to fit into a coherent and beautiful pattern, like the patches of the quilt she had finished that morning and that now covered their marriage bed. Under the silver light of the moon that filtered through the window, Clara and Luke sealed their union in the most ancient and sacred way, finding in each other the home they had both sought for so long. Summer unfolded over Montana like a multicolored tapestry. The fields around the Harrison cabin had blossomed under Clara's constant care, who had expanded the garden until it became a lush paradise where not only vegetables grew, but also medicinal herbs and flowers. 3 months had passed since the wedding, 3 months of adaptation, of small adjustments, of learning to live not only as a couple but as a family. Junie had flourished under Clara's care, becoming a more confident and cheerful child. Luke, for his part, seemed younger, as if the weight he had carried for so long had finally been lightened. That July morning, Clara woke before dawn, as was her custom. But instead of getting up immediately, she remained in bed, observing Luke's profile outlined against the grayish light beginning to filter through the window. His breathing was deep and regular, his face relaxed in sleep in a way he rarely allowed himself during his waking hours. Gently, Clara placed a hand on her belly. For weeks she had suspected, but now she was sure. A new life was growing inside her. The thought filled her with a mixture of joy and fear, joy for the miracle it represented, for the tangible extension of the love she shared with Luke, fear for the memories of stories her mother had told her about the difficulties of her own pregnancy, about how she had almost lost her. "What are you thinking about so early?" Luke's sleepy voice interrupted her reflections. Clara turned to meet his eyes, still heavy with sleep, but full of affection. "How fortunate I am," she responded, without lying, but without yet revealing her secret. Luke smiled, drawing her to him. "I'm the fortunate one," he murmured against her hair. "Each morning I wake up beside you is a gift." Clara nestled against his chest, listening to the strong and constant beat of his heart. She decided to wait a bit. Longer before sharing the news, she wanted to be completely sure, wanted to choose the perfect moment. The days passed with a pleasant routine that Clara had never known before. Mornings dedicated to the garden and teaching Junie about plants and animals. Afternoons helping Luke with cabin repairs or working on his wood carvings, which had begun to sell well in town. Evenings sharing stories by the fire, or simply enjoying the comfortable silence that only exists between people who feel completely at ease in each other's presence. But as the weeks passed, it became harder to hide the changes in her body. Morning sickness, sudden fatigue, sensitivity to certain smells. Luke began to look at her with a questioning expression, as if he suspected but didn't want to pressure her. One afternoon, while Luke had gone to town to sell some furs and carvings, Clara was on the porch, knitting a small wool cap. Junie, seated at her feet, played with rag dolls that Clara had made for her. "Is it for a baby?" asked the child suddenly, pointing to the tiny cap. Clara stopped her hands, surprised by the little girl's insight. "Why do you think that?" Junie shrugged, with that disconcerting simplicity of children. "It's very small. And I've seen you sick." In the mornings, like Mrs. Parker before she had her baby, Clara set her knitting on her lap, moved by the observation. She had underestimated Junie's capacity to notice details. "Yes, it's for a baby," she finally admitted. "For your little brother or sister." Junie's eyes opened wide, bright with excitement. "I'm going to have a little brother." Her voice was a reverent whisper, as if she had just received the most wonderful news in the world. Clara nodded, stroking the child's hair. "In a few months." "But it's a secret, all right? I want to be the one to tell your father." Junie nodded solemnly, crossing her fingers over her heart. "Scout's promise," she declared, with a seriousness that made Clara smile. That night after Junie fell asleep, Clara and Luke went for a walk in the clearing. The waning moon cast a soft light over the landscape, and the warm summer air was laden with the scent of wildflowers and freshly cut grass. "Luke," Clara began, stopping beside an old oak, "there's something I need to tell you." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the silver light of the moon, his expression attentive but calm, as if he already intuited what he was about to hear. "I'm expecting a child," Clara said simply, without preamble. For an instant, Luke remained, completely still, as if the words took time to fully penetrate his consciousness. Then slowly, a smile began to spread across his face, completely transforming him. "A child?" he repeated, his voice barely audible. "Are you sure?" Clara nodded, taking Luke's hand and placing it on her still flat belly. "As sure as I can be. Life grows here, Luke. Our child." With a sudden movement, Luke lifted her in his arms, spinning with her under the moonlight, his laughter resonating in the silence of the night. Clara clung to his shoulders, laughing too, her heart so full of joy that it seemed impossible to contain it within her chest. When he finally set her on the ground, Luke took her face between his hands with infinite tenderness. "I love you, Clara." "May Harrison," he declared, using her married name for the first time. "I love you more than I thought it possible to love someone." "And I love you," she responded, feeling that the words were insufficient to express the depth of what she felt. They kissed under the ancient oak, silent witness to their happiness. In that moment, with the stars shining above them and the promise of new life growing within her, Clara knew she had finally found her place in the world. It wasn't a geographical place, but a state of the heart, that safe space created by true love, where the color of her skin or her origins didn't matter, where she was valued simply for being who she was. The following months passed like a sweet dream. Clara's belly grew along with the garden harvests, both nourished by the summer sun and constant care. Luke had embarked on the task of expanding the cabin, adding one more room for the baby. He worked from dawn until dusk, his hands creating a physical space for the new life they awaited, while his heart expanded to house an even greater love. Junie had become the most enthusiastic helper to both. She followed Clara through the garden, learning the names of medicinal plants that might help during childbirth and afterward. She accompanied Luke in his carpentry work, holding nails and passing him tools with a seriousness that contrasted with her childish face. One late summer afternoon, as Clara sewed tiny garments for the baby, she heard Junie's voice calling her. From the porch, "Clara, come quick." Junie's voice vibrated with barely contained excitement. Clara set aside her sewing and rose carefully, one hand instinctively supporting her swollen belly. Upon reaching the porch, she saw Junie standing next to a young tree they had planted in spring, a small apple tree that would someday bear fruit for the family. "Look!" exclaimed the child, pointing to a tiny white flower that had sprouted on one of the branches out of season. "It bloomed. Mr. Thunder said that if a tree blooms out of time, it's because it senses the arrival of a new spirit." Clara smiled, moved by Junie's innocence and by the beauty of the small miracle. In her culture, signs from nature were never casual, but messages for those who knew how to interpret them. "It's a sign of welcome," she confirmed, stroking the child's hair. "The tree is greeting your little brother or sister before they arrive." That night, when she shared the anecdote with Luke, he listened with that complete attention he always dedicated to her, as if each of her words were a treasure he should carefully guard. "My grandmother would have said the same thing," he commented, his hands busy carving a small wooden cradle. "That nature knows things that we have forgotten." Clara observed his skilled fingers giving shape to the wood, creating a refuge for the life growing within her. The cradle was almost finished. Each detail worked with love and patience. On the edges, Luke had carved Kiowa protection symbols that Clara had taught him, mixed with traditional motifs he had learned from his own father. "It will be perfect," she murmured, running her fingers over the smooth curves of polished wood. Luke looked up, and in his eyes, Clara saw reflected the same mixture of hope and fear that she felt. "I'm afraid sometimes," he confessed in a voice so low that Clara barely heard him, "of not being enough, of not being able to protect all of you." Clara approached him, taking his rough hands in hers. "No love can guarantee a life without pain," she said softly, "but being together makes us stronger against whatever may come." Luke nodded, resting his forehead against hers in an intimate gesture that had become their particular way of communicating what words failed to express. August gave way to September, and with the change of season, Clara's body prepared for birth. The women of the town, who had initially shown reluctance toward her, began to approach with advice and small gifts for the baby. The doctor's wife taught her to prepare tinctures to ease the discomforts of childbirth, while the elderly Mrs. Parker gave her a shawl she had knitted with her own hands. Slowly, Clara realized that her presence in the community was being accepted, not by all but by more people than she would have imagined. Her knowledge of medicinal herbs and her willingness to help whoever needed it had begun to earn her a respected place. One afternoon, as Clara harvested the last tomatoes from the garden, she felt the first contraction, a dull pain that spread across her lower back. She breathed deeply, leaning on the fence. It was too early, she told herself. There were still weeks left before the date she had calculated, but her body had other plans. Before nightfall, it was clear that the baby had decided to arrive without waiting for an invitation. Luke sent a neighbor to fetch Dr. Miller and the town midwife, while he prepared the room according to Clara's instructions. The hours that followed merged into a continuous flow of pain and waiting. Clara, who had assisted at several births, as her father's helper, now found herself on the other side of the experience, navigating unknown and tempestuous waters. Junie had been sent to the neighbor's house, but she firmly refused to leave. "I want to be there when my little brother arrives," she declared, with a determination that reminded Luke of his most obstinate moments. Finally, she was allowed to remain in the living room, accompanied by Nancy Miller, while in the bedroom, Clara fought her most difficult battle yet. The birth was long and exhausting. As the night progressed, the pain intensified, taking Clara to the limit of her endurance. In the darkest moments, when strength seemed to abandon her, she felt Luke's constant presence, who never let go of her hand, whispering words of encouragement and love in her ear. "You are the bravest woman I've ever known," he repeated, wiping the sweat from her brow. "You can do this, Clara. We're in this together." The midwife, a woman with expert hands and a severe but kind expression, directed the process with calm efficiency. "He's coming well," she assured periodically. "Your body knows what it's doing. It just needs time." With the first light of dawn, a powerful cry broke the silence of the room. a small but fierce sound announcing the arrival of new life to the world. "It's a boy," announced the midwife, placing the baby on Clara's chest. "A strong and healthy boy." Clara looked for the first time at her son's face, a perfect mixture of her and Luke. He had dark hair like hers, but the shape of his mouth and nose were unmistakably his father's. His tiny hands waved in the air, as if seeking to grasp this new world he had just entered. "Nikan," whispered Clara, tears of joy rolling down her cheeks. "He will be called Nikan, like my father." Luke, who contemplated the scene with moist eyes, nodded, unable to speak for the emotion that constricted his throat. When Junie was finally authorized to enter the room, she approached the bed with cautious steps, her enormous eyes fixed on the small bundle in Clara's arms. "He's very small," she observed in an amazed whisper. "But he will grow," Clara assured her, making space for the child to sit beside her. "And you will be the best big sister." He could have. Junie extended a trembling finger to touch the baby's cheek, marveling when he moved slightly toward her touch. "He likes me," she declared with a radiant smile. "Of course he does," confirmed Luke, sitting on the other side of the bed, completing the family circle. "You're his big sister, his protector." As the light of dawn flooded the room, bathing the reunited family in a golden glow, Clara felt a deep peace settle in her heart. The path to this moment had been full of pain and loss, but now she understood that each step had been necessary to reach this fullness. Little Nikan would become the perfect bridge between two worlds, two cultures, two stories that now intertwined, like the threads of the quilt that covered the bed where he was born. In his veins would flow Kiowa blood and white blood, but he would grow knowing that both were equally valuable, equally part of his identity. Clara looked at Luke over the heads of Junie and the baby, and in that look they shared a silent promise. They would raise their children in a home where love transcended the barriers that the world tried to impose, where each could be exactly who they were destined to be. The fertile ground had not only yielded fruits in the garden that Clara had cultivated with such care, it had also made bloom the most precious seed of all, a family built not by obligation or convention, but by choice and true love. Winter returned to Montana, covering fields and forests with its white mantle. But inside the Harrisons' expanded cabin, the warmth of home kept the outside cold at bay. Clara moved through the room with little Nikan cradled against her chest, while Junie practiced her reading by the fire, and Luke carved a wooden horse that would be his daughter's Christmas gift. The first months with the baby had brought new challenges and joys, sleepless nights, the uncertainty of first-time parents, the wonder at each small achievement of the newborn. But they had also brought greater cohesion to the family, as if little Nikan had definitely sealed the union between all of them. "He's identical to you when you concentrate," Clara commented to Luke, observing how the baby furrowed his brow while trying to catch a ray of sunlight dancing on the blanket. Luke looked up from his work, a smile illuminating his tired face. The dark circles under his eyes spoke of interrupted nights and shared worries. "He has your determination," he responded. "He never gives up until he gets what he wants." Clara smiled, sitting beside him with the baby still in her arms. Nikan was already showing signs of personality. He was curious, persistent, and surprisingly serene for his age, rarely startling, as if he had come into the world with an innate certainty about his place in it. "He reminds me of my father," Clara confessed, caressing the baby's cheek. "The same wise expression, as if he knew secrets that we have forgotten." Luke nodded, setting aside his carving to take his son. His hands, large and calloused, held the baby with a delicacy that contrasted with his rugged appearance. Clara never ceased to marvel at this image. The strong man turned to pure tenderness before the fragility of his son. "Your grandfather was a wise man," Luke murmured to the baby, "and you carry his name and his blood. Great things are expected of you, little Nikan." Junie joined them, abandoning her book to observe her brother with the fascination that never diminished. "When will he be able to play with me?" she asked, a question she repeated almost daily since the birth. Clara laughed softly. "There's still time, but before you know it, he'll be following you all over the house, wanting to do everything you do." The child smiled, pleased at this prospect. Since Nikan's arrival, Junie had assumed her role as big sister with a seriousness that was sometimes comical in someone so small. She had become Clara's most enthusiastic helper, running to fetch clean diapers or the baby's favorite blanket even before being asked. Winter progressed, and with it came Nikan's first Christmas. Luke and Clara had decided to celebrate it by combining traditions, the tree and gifts from Western culture, along with Kiowa rituals of Thanksgiving for the future return of the sun. The night before Christmas, while Junie slept, dreaming of the next day's gifts, Clara and Luke sat by the fire with Nikan asleep in his cradle. "I never thought I would have this," Luke confessed, contemplating the dancing flames. "After losing Weena, I believed that part of my life was over forever." Clara rested her head on her husband's shoulder, inhaling the familiar scent of wood and soap that always accompanied him. "I didn't imagine I would find a home like this either," she responded. "After so many rejections, I had begun to believe there was no place for me anywhere." Luke took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. They needed no more words. Both understood the value of what they had built together, a refuge not only against the outside cold, but against the prejudices and pain that had marked their previous lives. Christmas morning brought the joy of Junie discovering her gifts: the horse carved by Luke, a set of miniature porcelain cups Clara had bought on her last visit to town, and a new blanket knitted by Mrs. Miller. But the gift that most moved the child was an unexpected one, a charcoal drawing Clara had made of the complete family, framed by Luke in cherry wood. "It's us!" exclaimed Junie, running her little fingers over the glass protecting the drawing. "All together!" "So you never forget that we are a family," explained Clara, hugging the child. "No matter what happens, we will always be together in our hearts." The day passed with festive meals, songs by the fire, and the surprise visit of old Sam Thunder, who brought with him a special gift, a protection amulet for little Nikan, carved in deerbone according to Kiowa tradition. "So he will always find his way," explained the old man, placing the amulet in the baby's cradle. "Between two worlds, between two bloods, but always true to his heart." Clara thanked for the gift with tears in her eyes, recognizing in it the acceptance of her son in the tradition of her people, a recognition that she herself had yearned for throughout her life. As January gave way to February, and February to March, life in the cabin acquired a tranquil but satisfying routine. Clara had begun to receive occasional visits from women from town who sought her herbal remedies and her advice on childbirth and child care. Her knowledge, previously viewed with suspicion, was now valued by many who recognized its effectiveness. Luke, for his part, had expanded his wood-carving business. He no longer just sold simple figurines and utensils, but small furniture, frames, and elaborate toys that fetched considerable prices in town and even in nearby cities, where he sent his work through itinerant merchants. One early spring afternoon, as Clara planted seeds in the expanded garden, with Nikan sleeping in a basket in the shade of an apple tree, she heard the sound of approaching hooves. She looked up to see Luke returning from his monthly trip to town, but he was not alone. Beside him rode a man Clara did not immediately recognize. When they got close enough, Clara's heart skipped a beat. The stranger was no stranger. It was Harland Coulter, the man who had invited her to Red Creek only to abandon her on that cold platform more than a year ago. She rose slowly, cleaning the dirt from her hands on her apron, a strange calm taking hold of her. The fear and shame she would have expected to feel upon meeting again the man who had humiliated her did not appear. In their place, she felt a kind of distant compassion, like someone observing a past stage of her life from a great height. Luke dismounted first, approaching Clara with a serious but calm expression. "Coulter wanted to talk to you," he explained in a low voice. "I ran into him at the town store. I told him it depended completely on you, whether you wanted to see him or not." Clara nodded, grateful for Luke's respect for her decision. She looked at the man who remained mounted on horseback, visibly uncomfortable. "You may dismount, Mr. Coulter," she finally said. "There's no reason why we can't talk like civilized people." Harland Coulter dismounted clumsily, his expression a mixture of shame and surprise, probably at seeing the confident and serene woman Clara had become. "Miss Whitford," he began, removing his hat. "Mrs. Harrison now," she corrected gently, without hostility. Of course, Coulter cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. Mrs. Harrison, I've come to apologize for my behavior last year. I have no excuse for what I did. Clara observed him in silence. Harland Coulter was not as she remembered him. In her memory, he was an imposing figure, capable of inflicting deep pain with his rejection. The man before her seemed smaller, insecure, almost insignificant. "What made you change your mind?" she finally asked, genuinely curious. Coulter lowered, his gaze turning his hat in his hands. "Shame, I suppose, and time to reflect. I've realized that my prejudices made me lose the opportunity to know an exceptional woman." Clara felt Luke's presence beside her, solid and comforting. She detected no jealousy in him, only silent support, the assurance that whatever her response, he would be there. "I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Coulter," she finally responded. "And I accept your apologies." The relief on the man's face was evident. "It's more than I deserve," he admitted. At that moment, Nikan began to cry in his basket. Clara went to take him in her arms, and upon returning to the men, she saw the surprise on Coulter's face. "My son," she explained with quiet pride. "Nikan Harrison." Coulter observed the baby, whose mixed features were evident even at such an early age. "He's a beautiful child," he said, and for the first time since his arrival, his words sounded completely sincere. "He is," confirmed Luke, placing a protective hand on Clara's back. "Like his mother." The meeting lasted little more. Coulter politely declined the invitation for tea, claiming he had to return to town before nightfall. As they watched him move away down the path, Clara felt that a chapter of her life was definitely closing. "Are you all right?" asked Luke, when the rider disappeared in the distance. Clara reflected a moment before responding, gently rocking Nikan. "In her arms. Better than all right," she finally said. "I feel as if I've been freed from a weight I didn't know I was still carrying. Sometimes we need to face our ghosts to realize they can no longer frighten us." Clara smiled, leaning against her husband's chest as she watched the horizon where the mountains were silhouetted against the blue spring sky. "I wouldn't change anything," she declared. "Not even the painful moments, because they all led me here, to you, to our family." Luke kissed her forehead tenderly, and together they returned to the cabin where Junie awaited them, surely full of stories about her day at the school she had begun attending that year. That night, as the spring wind whispered among the pines, and the new moon promised cycles of renewal, Clara contemplated her sleeping family. Luke with his deep and regular breathing, Junie curled up with her rag doll, Nikan in his cradle carved by his father's hands. The path had not been easy. The outside world was still often hostile to families like theirs. Prejudices did not disappear overnight, and she knew that their children would face challenges because of their mixed heritage. But in that refuge they had built together, in that sacred space that was their home, they had created a microcosm of what the world could be, a place where differences did not separate but enriched, where love transcended artificial barriers, where each person was valued for the unique light they contributed. And for that night, that was enough. For that night, the sweetest winter they had known gave way to a promising spring, and in the heart of Clara May Harrison, formerly Whitford, blossomed a certainty. She had found finally her place in the world. The summer of 1885 displayed all, its glory over the fields of Montana. Clara's garden had grown to become a lush paradise where medicinal plants shared space with vegetables, flowers, and berry bushes. The cabin, expanded and improved by Luke's skilled hands, was no longer the simple structure Clara had known upon arrival. Now it had a large porch where the family gathered on warm evenings, 2 additional rooms, and an attached workshop where Luke created his increasingly sought-after wood carvings. It was Sunday, and the entire Harrison family was enjoying a day of rest by the small stream where, almost 2 years earlier, Clara had saved Junie from drowning. That place, which could have been marked by fear and the memory of danger, had been transformed by them into a space of celebration, a symbol of their ability to convert trials into triumphs. Junie, who had already turned 5, splashed in the shallows under Luke's watchful eye, while Clara, seated on a blanket spread on the grass, nursed little Nikan, who would soon celebrate his first birthday. "He's growing so fast," commented Luke, sitting beside her after making sure Junie was safe in her play. "Soon he'll be running after his sister." Clara smiled, observing her son's face, who looked at her with eyes that were an exact reflection of her own. "Time passes like water between the fingers," she responded, caressing the baby's cheek. "Sometimes I can hardly believe that almost 2 years have passed since I arrived in Red Creek." Luke took her free hand, intertwining his fingers with hers in that gesture that had become their particular way of communicating what words did not always manage to express. "Sometimes I feel I've known you all my life," he confessed. "As if all my previous experiences were only preparation for finding you." Clara rested her head on Luke's shoulder, letting the summer sun warm her skin and the peace of the moment settle in her heart. The last few months had brought significant changes, not only for their family, but for the entire community. Red Creek was growing. The railroad had begun to bring more travelers, some of whom decided to stay, attracted by the fertile lands and opportunities offered by an expanding town. With the new inhabitants came new ideas, and Clara had noticed a gradual change in how she was perceived. She was no longer Harrison's Indian or the half-breed, but the healer, or simply Mrs. Harrison. Her herbal remedies had gained such a reputation that even Dr. Miller occasionally consulted her about treatments for ailments that conventional medicine failed to alleviate. Luke, for his part, had established a prosperous business. His carvings were not only sold in Red Creek, but merchants from cities as far away as Helena and Great Falls came specifically to commission pieces from him. The combination of traditional Western techniques with motifs and symbols Clara had taught him gave his creations a unique and recognizable character. But more important than external recognition was the solidity of what they had built within, the walls of their home, a refuge where each family member could be exactly who they were without fear of judgment or rejection. Junie's cry interrupted her thoughts. The child was running toward them, holding something in her hands with extreme care. "Look, Clara," she exclaimed, kneeling beside them. "An injured butterfly." Indeed, between her hands curved like a bowl, a monarch butterfly weakly fluttered its orange and black wings. One of them seemed slightly damaged. "It can't fly well," explained Junie with genuine concern in her voice. "Can we heal it?" Clara smiled at the child's compassion. That capacity to care for the smallest and most vulnerable creatures was something she had consciously cultivated in her, an extension of her father's Kiowa teachings about respect for all forms of life. "Butterflies are more resilient than they seem," she responded, carefully examining the insect. "Their wings can repair themselves if we give them time and a safe place." Junie nodded with seriousness, as if she had just received crucial information. "Can we make a home for her until she heals?" Luke intervened, tousling his daughter's hair with affection. "Of course, little one. We can use that large glass jar we keep in the cupboard. We'll put fresh leaves and flowers in it so she feels at home." Junie's face lit up with a radiant smile. Clara exchanged a look of complicity with Luke. Both knew the butterfly probably wouldn't survive long, but the lesson of care and responsibility toward a weaker being was too valuable to miss. As they gathered their things to return home, the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in golden and reddish hues. Clara observed her family. Luke carrying Nicken in one arm and the picnic basket in the other. Junie walking carefully with her fragile treasure protected between her hands. Herself bringing up the rear with the folded blanket under her arm. An image of imperfect perfection, she thought. Not the family she had imagined as a child, nor what society would consider normal, but exactly the family she needed. The one that had saved her as much as she had saved them. That night, after putting the children to bed, Junie with her butterfly installed in an improvised glass sanctuary beside her bed, Nicken with the bone amulet Sam Thunder had given him hanging, over his cradle, Clara and Luke sat on the porch to contemplate the stars. "I received a letter today," commented Luke, breaking the comfortable silence they had been sharing. "From... say that she would come to have a child of her own when she had given up on that possibility. That she would build a home where her mixed heritage would be a source of pride, not shame. Everything is connected," her father used to say. "The threads of our lives interweave in ways we cannot understand, while we are weaving the pattern. Now seated beside Luke on the cart's driving seat, with Junie and Nikan sleeping in the back, Clara finally understood the wisdom of those words. Each step of her path, even the most painful ones, had led her exactly to where she needed to be. The sun rose in the sky, promising a clear and bright day. Before them, the road stretched toward a future they would build together, one day at a time, with the same patience and dedication with which Luke carved wood or Clara cultivated her plants. "Ready?" asked Luke, as they left behind the last buildings of Red Creek. Clara smiled, feeling a strange mixture of closure and opening, of ending and beginning. "Ready," she responded, and in that single word there was certainty, hope, and the silent promise that whatever happened, they would face together each dawn, each storm, each moment of joy or pain that life would bring them. The circle that had begun on that cold platform was now complete, not with a return to the starting point, but with the understanding that life was not a straight line but a spiral, that takes us again and again to the same places, but always at a different level, always with a new perspective, always with the accumulated wisdom of previous turns. And as the cart advanced along the dusty road, Clara felt a deep peace settle in her heart. She had found her place in the world, not at a specific geographical point, but in that sacred space created by true love, that portable refuge they carried with them wherever they went. The western wind blew at their backs, like a blessing, like a gentle push toward the new chapter they were beginning to write. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, savoring the sensation of freedom, of possibility, of fullness. "Thank you," she thought, directing that gratitude to all who had been part of her journey. Her parents, who had taught her to honor all parts of herself, Weena, whose absence had created the space she now occupied, the men who had rejected her, unknowingly pushing her toward her true destiny, and above all, to little Junie, who with a simple, childish question had changed the course of all their lives. The answer, Clara now knew, had been in her heart from the first moment. Yes, she could be a mother, wife, healer, friend. She could be all versions of herself, all the possibilities that dwelled within her. She could be Clara May Whitford and Clara May Harrison. She could honor her past while building her future. She could finally simply be. Great Falls welcomed the Harrison family with the hustle and bustle of a growing frontier city. Compared to Red Creek, it seemed enormous to Clara, with its multi-story buildings, paved streets, and the constant flow of people of all kinds, businessmen in suits, workers with calloused hands, women in fashionable dresses, and children running around the central square. The house Luke had purchased stood on the outskirts of town, a two-story wooden structure with a large yard that Clara immediately envisioned filled with medicinal plants and flowers. It was more spacious than their cabin, with separate bedrooms for the children, a large kitchen and a room that would serve as Luke's workshop until he could establish his permanent one in town. "What do you think?" Luke asked, watching Clara's face carefully as she toured the house for the first time. Nikan balanced on her hip. Clara took her time, absorbing the sensation of the new space, listening to the creaks of the wooden floors, feeling the light that streamed through the large windows. It wasn't the cozy cabin they had left behind, with its memories and familiar warmth, but it had its own kind of charm, a promise of new possibilities. "It's perfect," she finally said, turning to him with a genuine smile. A clean canvas, Junie, had already claimed her room, running up and down the stairs with the boundless energy of childhood, dragging her rag doll and announcing to no one in particular which corner would house her toys, where her bed would go, how she would arrange her small collection of treasures. The first weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Unpacking, arranging, furniture, making the house habitable. Luke established his workshop in town, a space 3 times larger than what he had in Red Creek, with large windows that provided perfect natural light for his detailed work. Clara began to prepare the soil in the yard, marking areas for different types of plants, planning her new medicinal garden. Great Falls offered opportunities they had never imagined in Red Creek. There was a proper school for Junie, with trained teachers and classrooms full of children her age. There was a library where Clara could expand her knowledge, borrowing books on botany and medicine that complemented what her father had taught her. There were markets with products from all over the country, stores with fabrics and goods that had never reached the small town they had left behind. But with these opportunities also came challenges. The anonymity they had hoped for wasn't complete. While Great Falls was indeed more diverse than Red Creek, prejudices still existed, just in more subtle forms. Clara noticed the sidelong glances when she walked with Luke and the children, the whispered comments, the occasional cold shoulder when she tried to engage with other mothers at the school. One morning, as she was buying supplies at the general store, she overheard two women talking, not realizing she could hear them. "That's her, the Indian woman who married Luke Harrison," one said in a hushed tone. "I hear he was married to another Indian before, seems to have a type." "Such a shame," replied the other. "He's quite handsome and successful. Could have had his pick of proper ladies." Clara felt her cheeks burn but kept her composure, finishing her purchase with dignity. She had faced worse in Red Creek. These petty comments couldn't touch the core of what she and Luke had built together. When she returned home, she found Luke in the yard, helping Nikan take his first uncertain steps on the grass, large hands holding the tiny ones of their son, who giggled with delight at each wobbly advance. The sight washed away the bitterness of the overheard conversation. This was what mattered, the family they had created, the love that sustained them, the little moments of joy that punctuated their days. "How was town?" Luke asked, looking up with a smile that still, after all this time, made her heart skip a beat. Clara set down her basket of supplies. "The usual," she replied, choosing not to burden him with the pettiness she had encountered. "Mr. Jenkins asked when your first batch of furniture will be ready. Apparently there's already a waiting list of customers." Luke nodded, pride evident in his expression. "I'm finishing the dining set for the Millers this week, then I'll start on the rocking chairs for the Andersons." His business had flourished beyond their expectations. The unique style of his work, combining Western craftsmanship with Kiowa motifs and symbols, had caught the attention of Great Falls' more affluent citizens. What had once been a means of survival had become a sought-after art, commanding prices that would have seemed unimaginable in Red Creek. Clara, too, was gradually establishing herself in the community. At first, she had kept her knowledge of herbal medicine private, focusing on creating her garden and caring for her family. But word spread, as it always did. It began with a neighbor's child suffering from a persistent cough that conventional medicine couldn't alleviate. Clara had prepared a syrup of wild cherry bark and honey, a remedy her father had taught her. When the child recovered within days, the mother told her friends who told others. Soon Clara found herself receiving visitors at her back door, women with various ailments or sick children, seeking the remedies that the town doctor's strong medicines couldn't provide. She helped them discreetly, never charging more than the cost of the herbs themselves, often accepting payment in the form of fresh eggs, preserves, or handmade items. Dr. Thompson, Great Falls' physician, initially viewed her with suspicion and professional jealousy. One day he appeared at her door, a stern-looking man with spectacles and a carefully trimmed beard. "Mrs. Harrison," he began, his tone formal but not unkind, "I understand you've been practicing medicine in my town." Clara invited him in, her heart racing but her voice steady. "I wouldn't call it medicine, Dr. Thompson. Just traditional remedies passed down by my father, who learned them from his people." The doctor examined her garden through the window, his gaze lingering on the organized rows of plants, each clearly tended with knowledge and care. "Mrs. Peterson's boy had been coughing for 3 weeks. Nothing I prescribed seemed to help. 2 days after seeing you, he was playing in the street as if he'd never been ill." Clara remained silent, waiting for the accusation or warning she expected. Would follow. Instead, Dr. Thompson surprised her. "I studied medicine at Harvard," he said, turning to face her. "They taught us about anatomy, surgery, the latest theories of disease. But there was hardly a mention of the healing properties of plants, knowledge that people like your father preserved for generations." He paused, adjusting his spectacles. "I'm not here to stop you, Mrs. Harrison. I'm here to learn." That unexpected encounter marked the beginning of an unusual collaboration. Dr. Thompson would send her patients with ailments that his medicines couldn't cure, and Clara would share her knowledge. With him, explaining the properties of different herbs, how to prepare them, when to use them. In return, he taught her about anatomy, about the scientific understanding of the body and its functions, knowledge that complemented and enhanced what she had learned from her father. By the time winter arrived in Great Falls, the Harrisons had become an established part of the community. Not universally accepted, perhaps, but respected by many for their skills and contributions. Junie thrived in school, her natural intelligence and curiosity making her a favorite among teachers. Nikan grew stronger each day, now toddling confidently. Around the house, his dark eyes curious and alert like his mother's. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell gently outside, the family gathered in their living room, warmed by a crackling fire. Clara looked around at the home they had created. The furniture Luke had crafted with his own hands, the quilt she had continued to expand, adding new patches to represent their life in Great Falls, the children's drawings pinned to the walls, the evergreen boughs and berries she had arranged to celebrate both Christmas and the Kiowa winter solstice traditions. "I received a letter from Sam Thunder today," she told Luke as they sat side by side, watching Junie show Nikan how to hang ornaments on the small Christmas tree. "He says Red Creek has changed. The railroad has brought more people, new businesses. The Millers send their regards." Luke nodded, his arm around her shoulders. "Do you miss it?" he asked quietly. Clara considered the question, searching her heart for the truth. "I miss certain things," she admitted. "The quiet of the forest, the familiarity of the paths, the stream where you saved us, but I don't regret coming here." She looked at their children, at the home they had built, at the life they continued to shape together. "This is where we're meant to be now," she said with certainty, "and who knows what the future holds. Perhaps someday we'll return, or perhaps our path leads elsewhere still." Luke pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "Wherever it leads," he murmured, "we'll walk it together." As the snow continued to fall outside their window, blanketing the world in pristine white, Clara felt a deep contentment settle in her soul. The journey that had begun on that cold platform in Red Creek had taken unexpected turns, led her through valleys of pain and mountains of joy, but had ultimately brought her here, to this moment of perfect peace. Life would continue. To present challenges, she knew. There would be difficult days ahead, prejudices to face, obstacles to overcome. But she also knew they had the strength to meet whatever came their way, rooted in the love they had cultivated, in the family they had created, in the understanding that home wasn't a place, but the people with whom you shared your heart. Under the silent night sky, as her family gathered close, Clara whispered a prayer of gratitude to all who had come before her, to all who had shaped her path, to the forces that had brought her to this place of belonging. And somewhere in the vast universe, she felt her father's spirit smile upon them, his ancient wisdom vindicated in the life his daughter had built, bridging two worlds, honoring all parts of her heritage, standing tall and proud in a world that had once sought to diminish her. In that sacred moment, Clara May Harrison, daughter of Nikan and Hannah Whitford, wife of Luke, mother of Nikan and stepmother of Junie, healer and keeper of traditions, finally understood the full circle of her journey. It wasn't about arriving at a destination, but about becoming whole, about weaving together all the threads of one's being into a tapestry of authentic life. And as the children's laughter filled the room, as Luke's hand held hers with the familiar warmth that had become her anchor, Clara knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, home at last.